Today on Callahan's Garage, we are going to look at my rotisserie. So a bunch of you have asked me a lot of questions about the rotisserie. So today we're going to take a really good look at my rotisserie. I'm going to try to give you all the information so that you can build your own.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
Alright folks, welcome back to Callahan's Garage. My name is Callahan and today we are taking a last look at David's Beetle. So if you're just now joining us, this is my buddy David's 1965 Beetle. We've done a ton of work to this thing. We did a whole bunch of rust repair, a bunch of sheet metal work. We did front and rear aprons, we did rear quarter sections, we did both of the heater channels, we did floor pans, we did a bunch of little odds and ends stuff. So if you haven't seen any of those videos, please go check them out and leave some love on them. But today we're going to talk about my rotisserie. So when you're getting into a car, you know, when we're doing this amount of work to a car, when we're doing a full restoration, when we got a bunch of sheet metal work to do, a rotisserie is an invaluable tool. It makes all of this, you know, much easier on your body, much easier to access, you know, weird points in the car. You're not having to crawl up under it. So, you know, it's just a really beneficial tool. So I'm going to try to give you all of the information I can so that you can think about building your own. All right, so, you know, what is a rotisserie? What are we talking about when we're talking about putting a car, you know, onto a rotisserie? And all that is just, you know, some kind of fixture that holds the car that allows us to tip the car over and rotate the car while we're working on it. So, you know, the point of that is just mostly like comfort when we're working on the car and better access, you know, to different parts of the car, you know. So like when we did this heater channel, I was able to tip this car up, you know, get this heater channel, you know, right up at like chest level so I can sit there and, you know, easily access and work on everything. So that's the biggest benefit is, you know, just it makes everything more accessible. It makes it a little more comfortable to work on the car. We're not having to crawl all under it and around it and sit on the floor or sit on the stool, you know, it just makes everything a little bit easier. So there's a lot of different variations and configurations of rotisseries out there, but there's not really any, you know, like off-the-shelf type rotisseries that really work well for a Volkswagen. You know, you can buy rotisseries from like Jegs and Summit and stuff like that, and if you have a, you know, a big, you know, American-made car, you know, you mount to the front and the rear of the car, you know, they work great. But for a Volkswagen, you know, where basically all of our structural mounting points are underneath the car, you know, those rotisseries aren't really a great option. You know, so I looked and researched a lot for a long time before I built this one. I built this rotisserie a couple years ago, you know, for a specific project that I knew was going to take me a while to complete. I was going to have a lot of hours into the car. I was going to have the car for a long time. So I wanted the car, you know, to be able to sit on something that would keep it structurally sound, as well as making it really easy for me to work on. So I did a bunch of research. You know, looked at a lot of different pictures of different rotisseries that people have made over the years, and this is basically what I came up with. So I'm going to show you guys, you know, how all of this is configured. That way, you know, if you do want to try to build your own, you know, you have a pretty good idea of what you're getting into. So there's a few pros and cons, you know, building a rotisserie kind of in this configuration that I want to touch on really quick. The upsides to this are, you know, the entire car is very accessible at this point. So, you know, if you've got front quarter panel work to do, front apron work to do, same thing in the rear, you know, all of those points are very accessible. You know, a lot of your, you know, off-the-shelf rotisseries, the mount points and the pivot points are in front and behind of the car. You know, so if you use those, you know, they really interfere with being able to do some work, you know, like on the front or the back end of the car. With this, you don't have that. You know, everything is very easy to access. So the downside to this is, you know, our pivot point is, you know, relatively low on the body of the car. So what that does is it makes it a little top heavy, a little tippy, you know. So if you're working by yourself, you know, it can get a little hairy sometimes. And if you saw my other video, I did let this thing tip over. You know, so you just kind of have to be careful and know how to manage that. And I've done a couple of things when I put this together to help mitigate some of that, and I'll show you guys that as we get into this. All right, so I want to kind of take a look at the business end of the rotisserie back here so you can kind of see how this works before we tip it over and take a look at the whole thing. So you can see, you know, I've just got a post with two pieces of tubing on here. You know, these two pieces of tubing fit together really nicely so we get a nice clean pivot. I've got a plate here with some holes in it so I can lock this thing at varying angles. This will tip over a full 90 degrees. And then you can see we've got a couple of points in between there. So what I'm going to do is normally when I don't get in a hurry and get ahead of myself, I'll grab, you know, a little bolt like this with a spacer. And what I can do is I can just stick this through here. So I'll determine, you know, at what point I want this thing to tip over. And what this will do is, you know, just keep it from over rotating and make this a little safer to manage. So, you know, I can put my lock pin in here. I can take this out and then I can just tip the whole car over. So then I also have this jam nut and bolt here. And what I've done is cut a slot in the bottom of this tubing. So as you tighten this bolt, you know, it puts tension on this pivot tube here and allows this thing to rotate, you know, faster or slower. So if I tighten this up, you know, it just puts a little tension on here and keeps the car from being as tippy. So this is tightened up, you know, pretty snug. And basically what that allows me to do is just pull this pin out and then, you know, push the car over to whatever point I need it to be. Ta-da! So now we've got this thing tipped over. I got both of my lock pins stuck back in here, and this thing is, you know, rock solid, totally good for us to work on it, tipped over like this. And you can see, you know, this just gives us a lot more access to this heater channel. You know, the underside of the car back here makes everything a lot easier to work on. So before we start talking about how to put this thing together, let's talk about what all we're going to need to build it. And the bulk of the rotisserie is just built out of 2-inch square tubing. You know, so standard stuff, you can get at pretty much any metal supply shop. So it's like 2-inch square tubing. I think it's 1/8 inch wall. 1/8 inch wall, it's about as thin as you should really go. You know, when we're talking about building something that's going to hold up the body of a car, you know, we want it to have some strength and we want it to have some structure in it. But we don't want to make it so big and bulky that it's, you know, heavy and cumbersome to move around. So, you know, 1/8 inch wall, 3/16 wall is totally fine. And we used right around 3 full sticks of that 2-inch tubing. So that's 3 20-foot pieces. And you know, there is a lot of tubing that goes into putting this thing together. Then we need around 10 feet of 1-inch square tubing. So we're going to use the 1-inch square tubing for all of our bracing and gussets around the bottom of the frame. So not much of that. So then we need some 1/4 inch plate. So both of our anchor plates on the ends are 1/4 inch. Those pieces are right about 12 by 8 inches. So, you know, not a whole lot of 1/4 inch plate. And you can see I also used a little bit of plate to do some gusseting on the frame underneath the car. So a little bit of extra would be nice to have on hand. And then we need some tubing, you know, so the tubing is kind of the most important thing to pay attention to when you're buying your materials, because our bigger tubing needs to be DOM. So, you know, DOM tubing doesn't have a seam on it. It doesn't have a weld seam. So it's going to allow that inner tube to slide into it and move really cleanly. So the size of the tube doesn't necessarily matter. I think the ones I used are like 2-inch on the smaller one and 2.5 on the larger one. But you basically just need to get 2 pieces that are going to fit together, you know, really nice and snug. So I'm going to start talking about how to put this thing together. I'm going to try to break it up step by step and remember how I did this exactly when I put this thing together a couple years ago. And if we just kind of just think through it step by step, it's really not that difficult. This can be kind of a daunting task, you know, kind of intimidating to think about. But just remember, you know, we have the car to use as a reference point, you know. So when I was building this thing, I was basically just building it off of the car. You know, so I had the car up on sawhorses and just used all of my existing mount points on the car to know where everything needed to land. So I'm going to try to walk you guys through that and, you know, explain how to do this. So once I get the body off of this thing and I can access, you know, just the rotisserie a little bit better, I'm going to do my best to put together, you know, a blueprint with some really good dimensions to make available to you guys so you can, you know, use that to put one of these together down the road. So the first thing you're going to do is just build our upright pieces. You know, so these don't have to reference the car at any point. We just need to build 2 posts that exactly match each other so that we can, you know, mount the car at the same height on the front and the rear. And this is very straightforward. You know, it's a very simple T-frame. We've got an upright piece. The hardest part of this is coping the top of the tube to fit onto your, you know, our round tube here. So we just need to cut this a little bit and make sure it fits up nicely to our round tube. So This post here, our upright, is right about 3 feet. That's a pretty good height for most standard garage heights. That'll roll in and out of my garage door totally fine. If you have a lower garage or, basement or whatever, you can absolutely make this shorter. And then our bottom piece is about 6 feet wide. 6 feet is about as narrow as you really want to go. If you go any narrower than that, this thing risks getting a little tippy, and we absolutely don't want it to tip over. So mine, 3 feet high, about 6 feet wide. And you can see on mine, on the bottom piece, I kind of kicked them up to get this thing sitting a little bit lower to the ground. You can totally make that bottom piece straight. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So then once you get your upright pieces made, just kind of set them to the side. We're not going to need them for a little while. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to make all of our body mount braces. So we've got one here on our rear body mounts. We've got 2 on our heater channels, and we got 1 in the front on our front body mounts that are underneath the gas tank. So this one is like 42 inches. These 2 are 47 inches, and the front one is 13 inches. But just keep in mind, these are just going to be wide enough to come, just a little bit out past our mount point. And then we've got a bolt hole, a hole for our bolt right on the end of it. And then also keep in mind, you can see how I've mitered the end of these. And what that does, it just allows you really easy access, to this nut and bolt right here. If you leave these square, then you've just got to reach inside of that tubing there. So just mitering the ends of these just makes it really easy when you're taking this thing apart and putting it back together. So then remember, like I said, we're just kind of building this off of the car. So get all 4 of those pieces cut, bolt them up to the bottom of the car. Just as if you were bolting the car to the rotisserie, just go ahead, bolt these up into place where they're going to live, and then we can kind of build everything off of that. And then if we look at my heater channel mount braces here, you can see mine have a separate piece on the end. The reason I did this is so that this piece can be removed and is also adjustable to accommodate different cars. So for example, like a Karmann Ghia, the heater channels, our heater channel mounts are a little bit wider. So if I'm doing a Ghia, I can just slide this out, move it to my different bolt hole, and this thing is ready to bolt up to a Karmann Ghia. Same thing on my rear mount here. I made this adjustable. If I remember right, the later model body mounts are in a slightly different place. So just having a little bit of adjustability allows me to accommodate, a couple of different varieties of cars. If you're only doing one restoration, you absolutely don't have to do this. Just weld these solid, you're totally fine. So once you get all of your cross braces cut and bolted up to the car, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make this spine piece that runs down the, the length of our rotating assembly. And all you can see, all this does is it just welds up to the bottom of these. So you can cut this piece, leave it a little long because we don't know exactly where our upright pieces are going to land yet, but cut this piece, center it up on these tubes, and then go ahead and weld it in place. The biggest thing is making sure that you get this in the center. If this isn't in the center, your car is going to want to tip, one way or the other. So find the center point of your cross pieces, mark it, clamp it in place, weld this guy in. So once we got this piece welded in, we can then make our brace that goes up to our rear body mount, lock that in place, and you can see, like I said before, I made mine adjustable. You don't have to do that. You can weld this totally solid. So get your long piece in, get your rear body mount welded up, then we can look at attaching the upright piece to the rotisserie. So we can start in the rear, and you can see this piece here, this is right about 9.5 inches. So I've got my pivot point 9.5 inches up from my bottom tube. And what that does is that kind of moves this pivot point up, which brings the center of gravity down. So it makes, a little less tippy, a little better. If we have this pivot point all the way down here at the bottom, then our pivot point is underneath the, completely underneath the body of the car, and it's going to really be tippy and top heavy. So you can go ahead and cut this upright piece, make a gusset, get this tacked in here, make sure this piece is nice and square. And then from there, we're going to weld our smaller tube just straight to this upright piece. And once you've got your smaller tube welded in place, you can take your existing post that we've already made, slide it into place, and then that's going to kind of show you how to make this plate. This plate is going to be pretty self-explanatory. We just need the top of our plate to be at the center line of our tube, and then we just need to use a compass, come down, mark our outer radius, and then just drill us a series of holes wherever you decide that those need to be. Just make sure that you put one right in the middle so this thing will stay, nice and level. And once you get your plate made, you can weld your plate in place. And then don't forget to drill your hole in your post here. So that way your lock pin will go through your post and into your plate and actually hold this thing in place. If you want to fully option out your rotisserie, you know, this is the point where you could add your cinch bolt over here, but not totally necessary, but it is, you know, really handy to have if you're working by yourself. So then our front is going to be very similar. We've got our same upright piece, our gusset. So then go ahead and we can stick our smaller tube in. Now you can see the way this fell on mine is my inner tube right here is welded onto this upright piece. And then it kind of fell halfway on to my front body mount piece here. So I had to kind of notch out the tube to fit it up into here. And the downside to this is, you know, we have to kind of work all of this into place because it locks our front post in here. You know, this front post can't come off like the rear one could. So we have to kind of fit up our center, our smaller tube, put it through the post, and then sit the post up in here and kind of get it all in place as we weld it in. And then the same thing, you should have your plate where you made your identical plate front and back. Get your plate in place, make your hole, make your pin, locks in place, you're good to go. So at this point, we should have pretty much everything on the car done. You know, all of our cross braces are bolted into place. They're welded to our pieces that run lengthwise. Our posts are all welded together and in place. The next thing we need to do is tie those two posts together. You know, if we don't have our piece running along the bottom here, those posts are going to be tippy and they're not going to stay where they need to be. They're not going to support the car correctly. So we can set those posts up, make sure that they're squared up with each other, measure how long this centerpiece needs to be, cut it, weld it in place, good to go. The biggest thing is just making sure that those posts stay square with each other. You know, if they're kicked in or out, they're going to pinch on those pivot points and it's not going to pivot correctly. So make sure that everything stays square and in place when you're welding this together. So then after that, you can cut your braces out of our 1-inch tubing, get those welded in place, get everything locked in nice and solid, and this thing's pretty much done. All right, folks, so I know we kind of breezed through this, and, you know, it's kind of hard for me to explain some of this stuff without actually doing it, you know, as I'm explaining it to you. But hopefully, you know, you got a pretty good understanding of how my rotisserie is set up, how this works, and, you know, how you can take the steps to put one of these together yourself. And also keep in mind, you know, if you're not the most confident fabricator yet, you know, this is a relatively straightforward project. You know, it's not that difficult. It's mostly straight pieces, you know, a couple of miter cuts. You know, so if nothing else, this is a really good project that, you know, you can do some trial and error, you can make some mistakes, and it's still going to basically function. And it'll really help you to build up, you know, some of your fabrication skills before you dive into the really important stuff on the car. So like I said, I hope this has been helpful. If you have any specific questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm not going to sell you my rotisserie. I'm not in the business of trying to make any more of these to sell, so that's going to be a no. But if you need specific questions, if you'd like to see any specific pictures, also you can feel free to message me on Instagram. My Instagram info is in my information here on YouTube. So I'll post as much information as I can in the description. And like I said, I am going to try to put out a blueprint for this, you know, down the road. But, you know, that'll happen when it happens, so don't hold me to that. But hope this helps out. Hope you have some confidence to go out and, you know, get in the garage and put some stuff together and start working on your own car. So this will be the last that you see of David's Beetle. It is getting picked up this weekend and is going to be gone, but I've got a lot more air-cooled content coming up. I'm going to start the restoration process on one of my cars, and we're going to take a really good look at it. So thanks for watching. Please keep sticking around. I hope to see you guys next time.